Hi, welcome to Tips on Tuesday. This week we're going to be looking at how to replace a worn or damaged closing loop. Really essential bit of kit maintenance that quite often gets overlooked until it's too late. So here we see two examples. The top one being a brand new closing loop ready to be fitted, and the bottom one once been taken out of the rig because it's worn and damaged. Now you'll notice they're both made from different materials. That's not really an issue. However, it's the damage that we're looking at. So typically, I'll get about 100 jumps out of a closing loop before it needs changing. But I inspect it every time I pack. And if I think it needs to be changed, then it does. Now that may be drastically reduced in time if I'm jumping in sandy conditions, conditions where there's a lot of dust and grit about, or if I'm being a bit careless with my closing and I'm causing extra wear with my pull cord or packing tool. So with the deployment bag and canopy removed, you'll notice that the closing loop is held in the container in a small webbing pouch with a grommet that the closing loop passes through. So it's simply a case of pushing the closing loop back through the grommet and removing it from the pouch. You'll notice there's a small washer above a knot on the closing loop, and that's what stops it pulling through under normal use. Have a look at the damage and the wear on this one. Now compare that to the nice new one I'm about to change it for. To set the length of the loop, we first need to measure it against the old loop. Now if the old loop was the right length, that's fine, you could make it exactly the same length. I found that over time the loop I had in there had stretched slightly, so the grommets weren't quite as tight and close together as I like, so I'm going to make this one slightly shorter. Now you'll notice in the old loop there is a knot just below the washer, and that's what the washer sits on. So to measure it, I'm going to hold the two ends together and then tie a knot in the new loop that will roughly correspond to the old loop. And if it's not quite right first time, we can adjust that just by moving the knot further down until we get the length we're happy with. So once I've got the loop set to the right length, it's simply a case of taking the washer off the old loop, having a quick look to make sure it's not damaged in any way and there's no sharp edges that might damage the new closing loop, and then sliding it over the top of the new closing loop and sitting above the knot. If you find that there's a large excess of closing loop material left below the knot once you've set the length, then you can always shorten that just by adding another knot below the first one. In this case, it looks fine. There's not going to be a large loop of material sticking out, so that's all good to go. So to refit the new loop, we need to pass it back through the grommets in the small webbing pouch. Now if you've got small nimble fingers, then you may be able to do that just by feeding it in the back of the pouch and out through the grommet. If you've got big sausages like mine, then you may need to find another way of doing it. So what I do is I use a pull-up cord, pass that through the grommet first, and then put the loop onto the pull-up cord and just wrap it around another time, and then it's good to feed back through. So once you've got enough of the closing loop through the grommets that you can remove the pull-up cord, it's then just a case of taking the closing loop and pulling it as far through as you can so that the steel washer sits up against the grommet. And that way the closing loop is now installed, the length is set, and everything's good to go. Final thing is, if you've got any excess at the bottom of the closing loop material sticking out of the pouch, just neatly tuck that away, and that keeps it nice and neat and also prevents it from snagging on anything that you don't want it to snag on. And then the final thing to do, once the rig is actually closed, is just check that the closing loop is short enough that it keeps all the grommets pulled as tight in as possible. I may need to shorten this one, I'll just keep an eye on that. And then once the pin cover flap is closed, there's no sign of the pin anywhere near the edges of the pin cover flap. And then we're good to go. So that's it for another week. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more of these tips on Tuesday. Stay safe and enjoy your skydiving.